In the quiet hours of the night, 6 missiles roared through the skies of the Middle East, crashing into a U.S. military base in Qatar. No warning, no diplomacy, just fire. And now the world holds its breath. Is this the next chapter in a long-standing conflict, or the spark that could ignite a global war? But deeper still, what does this mean for us, not just as nations, but as people, as souls, as a generation standing on the edge of history? Let's take a step back and look beyond the headline. It started with a sound that most will never actually hear firsthand, a low, distant rumble cutting through the night sky over Qatar. 6 missiles launched from Iranian territory streaked across the dark horizon, their trajectory precise, their purpose unmistakable. Within seconds, the silence of a U.S. base was shattered as explosions ripped through key sections of that outpost. Sirens wailing, boots scrambling, chaos unfolding in real time. This isn't a military drill, this is real life. Real men and women serving their country found themselves in the middle of what could very well become a turning point in modern history. And while the footage might look like a video game on the evening news, everyone must remember, lives are hanging in the balance, and decisions made in the next 24 hours may shape global events for decades. Now let's pause, not to analyze the geopolitics just yet, but to understand the deeper story behind the missile smoke and shattered walls. When a nation like Iran, embroiled in economic turmoil, political unrest, and spiritual conflict, decides to strike a target as symbolically and strategically important as a U.S. base in the heart of the Gulf, something is shifting. This is not just about diplomacy that failed or alliances tested. It's about a long-standing tension that's boiling over. For decades, the Middle East has been a powder keg waiting for the next strike, the next spark. But today, something feels different. This was not a proxy skirmish. Iran didn't send militia fighters or cyber attacks. It sent missiles, loud, unmistakable, and deliberate. That sends a message, not just to the U.S., but to the world. And it forces each of us to ask, where is this headed? We're standing, perhaps unknowingly, at a historic crossroad. We've heard words like conflict, retaliation, and security so many times that they've become white noise. But listen close right now, and you'll hear that something in the global rhythm just changed. The pace got quicker, the path got narrower, and the stakes, they've never been higher. But behind every headline and breaking alert is a spiritual reality that no one is talking about. Wars don't start suddenly, not really. They begin in the hidden places. Pride, fear, vengeance, insecurity, they're birthed long before the first weapon is launched, in boardrooms, in backroom deals, and in the human heart, the heart that refuses to forgive, the heart that seeks its own way, the heart that would rather destroy than humble it. That's where the battle starts, and that's where it must ultimately be dealt with, not in the skies over Qatar, not in Pentagon strategy rooms, but in us, in people, leaders, nations, followers, every single one of us. You see, when a world forgets God, it doesn't lose its wonder all at once. It starts to trade eternal truth for short-term power, spiritual wisdom for political dominance. It moves from stillness to noise, from peace to provocation. And over time, the consequence is inevitable. Conflict becomes the only language anyone understands. We should ask, why Qatar? Why now? Why this bold move? The base there is one of the most significant U.S. installations in the region, housing thousands of personnel and coordinating both humanitarian and intelligence operations across the Middle East. Hitting it was not just targeting a piece of land, it was targeting presence, influence, ideology, and maybe, in a darker sense, It was testing resolve. No matter where you stand politically or what you believe about foreign policy, this gives us all something to consider. A nation emboldened to launch missiles at the world's most powerful military, either it's lost touch with reason, or it deeply believes that its back is against the wall and it must act drastically. And if that's true, then those missiles weren't just weapons, they were messages, and we'd be wise to listen carefully. History has shown us, from Rome to World War II to the long shadows of Afghanistan and Iraq, that violence isn't always loud at first. It begins quietly, incrementally, but make no mistake, it grows. And once it begins to wake, once it starts to stretch its arms and rise, the cost becomes unmeasurable. Not just in dollars, not just in strategy, but in lives, in families torn, in souls lost to fear, hatred, and grief. We're not just on the edge of a new headline, we may be standing at the edge of something older. The ancient story of man reaching for power and finding only ashes. This moment calls not first for retaliation, but for reflection. Not for more fury, but for stillness. For leaders in every nation to pause and ask, what kind of future are we building? What legacy are we writing? And above all, what is driving us? Because if we don't stop to ask these deeper questions right now, the smoke from tonight's missiles may darken a much larger sky tomorrow. And that's not just a military concern. That's a human one. Let's not look away. The missiles may have landed thousands of miles away from American soil, but the tremors, political, economic, and emotional, are already rippling across the globe. In war, there's a visible cost that plays out on battlefields and in newsreels. But what's less visible and often more dangerous is the cascading disruption it causes far beyond the explosion site. And that's exactly what we're beginning to feel now. Markets were the first to react. Within hours of the attack, oil prices spiked. Investors hit the panic button, and energy futures surged. Not unpredictably, this is the heartbeat of a region that still supplies a significant portion of the world's fossil fuel. Qatar borders nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, energy giants whose infrastructure bleeds into the global economy. That U.S. base sits there, not randomly, but strategically, to offer stability in a part of the world that has always walked a fine line between prosperity and volatility. So when missiles fly over it, the world doesn't just watch, it reacts. The economic consequences might feel abstract to some, like something that only lives in Wall Street reports or headlines scrolling at the bottom of a screen, but eventually they make their way into everyday reality. Higher fuel costs mean more expensive food, travel, heating, production, transportation delays mixed with rising insurance risks, and next thing you know, the price at your corner grocery store has changed and people struggle. One unexpected attack can echo through the systems we take for granted every day. But this kind of instability doesn't just infect prices, it shakes confidence. International alliances begin to shift. Political leaders around the world are forced to weigh their words more carefully, their actions more defensively. NATO holds emergency meetings. The UN gathers in closed-door sessions. Israel raises its alert level. Saudi Arabia and others brace for a reaction that might come in seconds or smolder for months. As the world watches, everyone starts asking, what will the U.S. do next? That one question generates a dozen outcomes, and not all of them lead to peace. This is more than strategy. It's human fear dressed up in language of diplomacy and deterrence. Behind every press release and military statement is a room full of people trying to read the future while trapped in the present. But uncertainty is a poor recipe for wisdom. Here's the sobering truth. we are at the mercy of fragile systems and fragile egos. And while some claim we live in the most technologically advanced age in human history, we're still only one decision away from chaos. One flare-up, one miscalculated drone strike, one false assumption, and a regional incident becomes a global emergency. That's the burden of modern geopolitics, its proximity to mass consequence. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, we have to ask, what are we truly witnessing? Is this the unraveling of systems or the revealing of them? Perhaps this moment is reminding us of just how thin the veil of peace really is, how interdependent our world has become, and how, when one region is in flames, the smoke is breathed in by everyone. There is no such thing anymore as over there. It's not just images and headlines that move fast across borders, it's consequences, it's radicalism, it's fear, and eventually it's ideology masquerading as justice. We have to recognize this for what it is. Not just a military breakdown, but a moral and spiritual one. There's a kind of panic swelling today, not just in presidential war rooms or financial institutions, but in the hearts of regular people. And they're asking the right question. If this escalates, what happens to us? Will my son or daughter be deployed? Will this mean another decade locked in the same cycle of war and withdrawal we've seen over and over again? Are we entering one more season of staged peace, followed by sudden violence? Are we watching the repeat of history or the beginning of its collapse? These aren't easy questions, and they don't lead to easy answers. But perhaps the deeper problem is not what's happening in Iran or in Qatar or in Washington. It's what's happening to our collective soul. More and more, our world responds to fear with fire, to uncertainty with force, to pain with politics. And in doing so, we forget the very thing that sustains true peace: humility. We trade reflection for retaliation. We treat wisdom like a shadow pacing behind louder voices. In moments of pain and pressure, we reach for might, but seldom for meaning. The world is watching a global fault line stretch, and as it does, we have to make a decision, not just as Americans, not just as citizens of the world, but as human beings. Will we be people who add weight to the tension, or rise with clarity, faith, and courage to diffuse it? No economy can outpace a world on fire. No currency is stronger than compassion. No military is more powerful than a people rightly aligned with truth. Because when the foundations shake, the only thing that stands is what was built on something deeper. And right now, everything shallow is starting to break. In moments like these, the world doesn't just look to headlines, it looks to leaders. After missiles strike a U.S. military base abroad, people don't just want answers, they want direction. They want to know, what does this mean for our troops, for our families, for our future? And perhaps more than anything, they want to know who, if anyone, is truly in control. This is not just a crisis for foreign policy experts. This is a test of national leadership, the kind of test that doesn't give you days to prepare. It arrives like a storm in the dead of night and demands a response before the sun rises. The question isn't simply whether the United States will act, but how it will act and from what source of conviction. In the minutes, hours, and days after an attack like this, the instinct is often to strike back. That's how we've been conditioned, to interpret strength as swift retaliation. And don't get me wrong, national defense is not optional. Innocent lives must be protected. Threats must be confronted. But if our only definition of strength is fire for fire, bomb for bomb, then we risk becoming the very thing we claim to resist. Leadership in a moment like this is not about power. It's about clarity. True leadership doesn't just see the enemy in front of them. It sees the path beneath them and the road ahead. It considers the price not just of doing nothing, but of doing too much. It weighs the costs not just in tactical terms, but in human lives and spiritual consequences. Today, American troops are stationed all across the globe, many of them in unpredictable regions, trusted to do their duty with discipline and honor. They didn't write the laws, they didn't sign the treaties, they simply put on their uniform and stepped into a calling. And they deserve something more than political calculation. They deserve moral clarity. They deserve leadership that honors their courage with wisdom, not leaders more concerned about approval ratings than doing what is right and measured. War, we have learned through bitter experience, is easy to start and hard to end. It's not just about firepower, it's about follow-through. It's about what happens after the flash fades and cameras move on. So before the drums of war grow louder, we need to ask the deeper questions. What are we protecting? What are we pursuing? Are we moving toward a solution or toward a cycle of vengeance? There's always a temptation in moments like this to posture, to speak louder than we listen, to project dominance as though that alone guarantees peace. But leadership without humility is not strength. It's blindness. And if our leaders can't look inward before acting outward, then we are not being led, we're being driven. Driven by fear, by pride, by the need to appear invincible in a world that already knows we're not. And what's even more sobering is this: leadership doesn't stop in the Oval Office. It doesn't end with intelligence briefings or prepared statements. In a free country, leadership also looks like public expectation. Our voices, our values, our pressure, we help shape the road our country takes, not just through elections, but through what we support, what we remain silent about, and what we demand in times like these. So maybe the real question isn't what will the president do, but what are we as a people calling him to do? Are we seeking justice or revenge? Are we championing wisdom or just waving flags in the wind? Because a nation gets the leadership it expects and, in many cases, deserves. It is far too easy to demand restraint until it costs us pride, or to demand force until it costs us sons and daughters. This is a moment for national reflection, not recklessness. The world is watching how we respond, not just militarily, but morally. Are we a nation that leads with principle or reacts with impulse? The burden of this moment lands squarely on the shoulders of those in power, yes, but its weight is made heavier or lighter by the soul of its people. And what does the soul of our nation look like today? Are we grounded? Are we praying? Are we listening to truth before we shout our opinions? Or are we tossed in every direction, wanting peace from a government while our homes remain divided, angry, and afraid? The future will not just be shaped by policies. It will be shaped by what we believe leadership should look like. It will rise or fall on whether our country is driven by conscience or by chaos. This isn't merely a political moment, it's a spiritual moment. Because wherever there is conflict, the human heart is exposed. And the decisions we make as a nation begin with the kind of leaders we follow and the kind of people we choose to be. We must choose wisely.